Hi everybody, welcome to the Istio Networking community meeting. Today we have 4 items on the agenda. So first, a few proposals from Louis about extension via customization, better default networking, as well as MTLS on by default. And also, if time permits, we'll discuss a bit about an issue that's been going on for more than a month and is related to service entry and security. Louis, if you are ready, feel free to join and present your documents. Hey, Louis, are you there? Okay, can people hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, the problem is Louis' headphone isn't working.
Okay. Louis,
can
also come to the room.
If you talk really loudly, my mic will pick you up. All right, Louis is on his way.
Hey,
everyone.
Okay, so let me see. Am I presenting now? No, present now. And the first one is this one, extension. Can everybody see the document, extension via customization, that I'm presenting?
Yep.
Okay, Louis will cover it. So let's see if you are.
So this is still fairly rough. So I'm not. This is really just to introduce the topic and ask people to kind of read in and weigh in with their opinions. So I think there's a couple of things that this spec is trying to do, but the primary one is to provide some mechanism that is stable and supported to customize the output of Pilot to Envoy so that people can inject custom behavior into the network, right? So, today we have the Envoy filter API, and there's a fair number of people out there using that today to inject things like Lua filters, for instance, into the sidecars and gateways to basically enable customization of the capabilities of Istio. So this proposal just takes that a little bit further and extends that customization to more types in the Envoy ecosystem, right? So clusters, listeners, filters, and probably filter chains. And so the goal of this mechanism is to allow people to both add new resources into the stream emitted by XDS, and also to customize the resources that are emitted by Pilot. So, if there's a flag that you want to set on a cluster in some build of Envoy that is not yet supported in the Istio APIs, right, this would enable you to do something like that. And we've had quite a few asks in the community to support adding, add support for features that we're not exposing as first-class things in our APIs. Sometimes we don't export things in our APIs for good reason, but then we end up in situations where people need that legally. So the general proposal is, basically we have a mechanism for patching a resource which is defined by a type. There's an operator describing the patch type to be performed. And there's some suggestions in here, though I think I need to go through and update this a little bit. There's a path, which is a path reference into the type to be mutated, saying where the mutation should occur, right? So if you've got a fairly structured object like a cluster, you can say that I only want to update this part of that cluster resource, right? And there's some syntax for that. And then there's the value that you want to apply, right? And these are fundamentally JSON objects that are converted into protobufs because XDS and Envoy uses protobuf, or JSON expressed as YAML in the actual CRDs when we use that, and then that's merged with replaces or is added to that object type in the stream of resources emitted to Envoy. So this document is written, obviously it needs quite a bit of updating, but that's the general idea, right? Is to be able to have an API that we can consider stable that supports a variety of structured mutations over the types emitted by Envoy, so that one, we give people break glass behavior or the ability to inject customization, and obviously this needs to scale, right? So there's a debate about how generic or how concrete the specification of these mutations should be defined, right? We could use, a scripting language or a pseudo scripting language to perform the mutations, but there's a debate about how performant that would be and what viable scripting engines we could use to embed that kind of customization. If you look in Kubernetes, for instance, they use JSON path to perform things like this. JSON path uses Go object reflection to perform that mutation, and we would have to benchmark to see if something like that would be sufficient. There's another technology that we could take a look at, which is basically called Cell, which is part of the kind of protobuf ecosystem developed by Google, which has an implementation in Go and operates over protobufs as an expression language that is not a Turing complete language, so it might mitigate some of the performance risks. But anyway, that still needs to be done as prototyping and as experimentation. And then there's some appendices in here which have not been filled out, which is to list out the likely use cases that people would use these things for, just so we can inform if we are going to do strongly typed match specifications for the types of resources we want to mutate, then we need to understand the use cases because we need to know what to put into those specifications. And so that needs to be filled out. And if people have suggestions of use cases, please either put a comment in this section and I will reconcile and make sure that they're all documented properly. And I have to go back through and scrape through the GitHub issues, but I know there's a variety of stuff documented there. I think Nino had a few of those, for instance. And yeah, this last piece is about how, because some of the things that we emit in XDS, we emit with kind of mangled names. The names that are used in the Istio resources don't carry through in a stable way into the resources that are emitted to XDS. And the canonical example here is cluster names, right? Cluster names are not the same thing as service entry names or Kubernetes service names. We might need this system to be able to operate on synthetic resources, so that people can use the names that they're using in the APIs and not have to do weird things like regex match subsections of the cluster names or other things like that. So anyway, that's the fundamentals of the proposal. Sorry, I'll pull this up. But the specification is not done yet. There are still pending design decisions. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this and understands the ramifications of it, which are pretty substantial. Right? If we're going to commit to this, and I think we want to because of the number of feature requests that we're getting, this provides a lot of power, a lot of break glass power. We have to be very careful with it, and it has to be able to perform at scale. So those are the kind of fundamental constraints. Now, all that being said, the one other thing that this offers as an opportunity, right, by providing more capability here, is we're also making it easier for people to build features that layer on top of Istio, right, and rely on this feature to use Pilot as the means to distribute those features in reliable ways. I had a conversation with Leeman and the Istio security team, for instance, about as a hypothetical, could they use this feature to implement Istio RBAC, to distribute the policies which are actually implemented as Envoy filters, and actually use that as the runtime mechanism for pushing that feature out, as opposed to having proprietary code in Pilot do that, right? And that was a hypothetical exercise, but I want to make sure that we can meet the needs of those hypotheticals, right? Let's say you wanted to swap one policy system for another, it should be able to perform and be as well integrated as something that we ship ourselves, right? Because that would help the vendor ecosystem, and I think that's the right principle to take. Any questions on that?
No, just one comment. So I really like that you support injecting listener filters. There's a lack of the capability to do that right now. Is the reason why Cilium has to use a fork of Pilot right now. So if you add that capability, we don't need the fork in Cilium anymore. So that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real need right now.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously we need to do a bunch of validation of this, but so it's hard to imagine this API being anything other than alpha. Right, Envoy filter is already alpha, so we're really just making the Envoy filter API more capable. Keep it in alpha, and then try and get some more vendor verification and use case verification. So, Roman, if you want to add that as a comment into the appendix about use cases, that would be very helpful. I can go follow up with the Cilium folks about that.
Yeah, I did a comment, but I can add to the body. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So just for the record, that PR actually there has those semantic matches that we were discussing about for clusters and routes in addition, and listeners, very similar to the filter. And there is always one final fallback, which is a regex, but which is not probably going to be used at all, because we have proper semantic matches for on ports or on types and context and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So Sriram's been doing a good job trying to keep up with the churn in the document, but there's still going to be some more churn.
And I think Utako, I forgot her full name, but she has a PR in Istio that actually implements this with the JSON part-based things. There's a work in progress PR that I have to dig up from somewhere. Hold on.
Yeah, if you could actually add that to the intro documents, just so we can track the three things together, that would be handy. So in particular, I was kind of curious, the Cloud Foundry folks, this should probably be pretty meaningful to you. I don't know if you've had need time to digest this, but I suspect you guys are injecting functionality into the network, right, as part of the solution, and either you're doing a kind of customized build of Pilot, or you're using this, or maybe you're not, and this will be useful later.
Yeah, Utako is on our team and has been doing the PR, as Sharon mentioned. Right now, we've got a custom MCP server, but I'm interested in digesting this and understanding what it enables.
Okay. Yeah, so I think from a delivery standpoint, I'd like to hear opinions about what should go into 1.2 or not. Obviously, we've cut the 1.2 release, so it's probably risky to try and put any form of this change into 1.2.
If 1.3 is a month away, then this can definitely wait. It's not immediate need.
Yeah.
But if 1.3 is going to take a while, then yes, then we might have to push some limited version of this, because there were a series of requests, like they wanted to enable some things in the HTTP connection manager for the X forwarded for settings and or the idle timeout settings and so on at the gateway level. And
right. Yeah.
So I've been fending them off, saying that wait for this one. So even if a limited version of this lands, then those people would actually be happy. But if the 1.2 is going to be out, 1.3 is going to be out in July, and we know for sure that is going to happen, then we can have the whole thing land in July, which will just allow people to add listeners, clusters, routes, you name it. Everything except Bootstrap config can actually be added here. So
okay. So let me try and. I haven't had as much time to get to this over the last 2 weeks as I would like, but I will try and push this, getting the design solidified as fast as possible. And sorry, I didn't quite catch the name of who was doing the prototype. I would be interested in seeing how JSON path compares with Cell, and I can have the Cell implementer reach out, and we could kind of do an A/B comparison for performance, because we are performance sensitive here. Okay, well, we should probably keep moving because there's a variety of things.
I just want to mention, I think this is probably too late for 1.2. And I think this thing, it's just out there, probably needs some time to settle down. So 1.3 is probably better.
Yeah, I think Sriram's point is just, can we have 1.3 be sooner than 3 months? Which we should bring on the deal.
Wait, sooner than 3 months, or simply ship on time? Yeah, okay. Because it's a 2-week difference.
Yeah, well, let's take that up in another forum, because obviously that's a broader set of concerns.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, we can also have a discussion about incremental feature enablement, right, in a point release, but. So the next document is the better default networking one. And this is really about minimizing the amount of administrative toil that people have to do to get maximum value out of the mesh. And in particular, minimizing the amount of toil people have to do so that when they install Istio, it doesn't break things. And it's related to some other proposals in this space. And, you know, we've kind of been trending in this direction generally for a while. Like, for instance, the mesh defaults to allow egress to go through, right? That change that was made in 1.1, right, was pretty important because it meant that when you installed Istio, you didn't just break things, right? And so we want to keep that kind of usability posture while still giving people more feature bang for their buck, right? If you get the install, what can we do for you without requiring you to do any more configuration of the system? Two of the major headaches today, at least with Kubernetes, are, and one of these is already now resolved in the 1.2 build. You had to declare the container port, right, to allow ingress traffic into the pod, because we didn't have segmentation in the filter chain in Envoy, and we could end up trampolining traffic, right? And so that was a security workaround, but the security workaround came with a usability cost. So Yuchen and Costin and Josh have been driving a bunch of fixes there. So now we have 2 filter chains, right? One for ingress and one for egress, and we hard partition the traffic between those 2 flows. And so we don't strictly need the container port anymore. And so there's less configuration work for the users to do to get traffic to work. So that's one. The other thing that what we require people to do today is to go through all their Kubernetes services and name their services, name the ports in their services with the protocols of the service, so that we can extract telemetry from it, particularly if it's HTTP or a protocol that we understand. That's a lot of work for people to do in an existing cluster. And so one of the proposals in this document is to basically enable Envoy to detect a small set of well-known protocols, but the most widely used ones. And if it detects the protocol, then it will treat it as that protocol. And we would extract telemetry and enable other routing and other features without requiring you to go through and declare what the protocols are.
But the old system of declaring still works, right?
Yes. Yeah. So this is, if you don't declare anything, then we'll detect it, right? So it's effectively making the default auto. But if you do declare it, then that's what it is. So the Tetrate folks, I think Lizanne was saying that he was going to do the work at Envoy to enable this. And this is already a fairly well-established pattern in Envoy, right? We already protocol sniff TLS, right, as part of the permissive mode handling. So this is just doing that for other protocols so we can do more stuff out of the box. The other thing that this proposal does which is somewhat leveraging the work done in Sidecar, is to make the default routing through Sidecar effectively be the Envoy original destination mechanism. Right. So if traffic comes into Envoy, we'll sniff the protocol, we'll do what we normally do for that protocol, particularly on the telemetry and policy side. And then if we don't really have a route for it, we will send it to original destination, right? Which is something that we did as a kind of mesh-wide config default. But we're now also going to put that as an option into the Sidecar API. Right. And what we really want to do is kind of transition more of what are the mesh-wide configuration defaults into features that are controllable by the Sidecar API and the other networking APIs, and then use the kind of default Sidecar API resource in the root config namespace as the default behavior, right? So we have fewer flags and use our APIs to control the features and use namespace scoping to opt into those features.
By the way, Lazan just joined.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, so the general goal here is you have an existing cluster with existing stuff, you install Istio, right? You do your injection, and then without doing any more work other than that, you see telemetry, you see protocol-specific telemetry for protocols we understand, and your traffic doesn't break, right? That's the kind of the fundamental usability story we want to have, at the very least in Kubernetes clusters.
Right, and that story is out there today, except that you need to declare container port and also the protocol.
Right, which means you have to do more work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we've had a lot of feedback from customers who have had to do that work and have grumbled about it at every step of the way.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is just toil, right? These are things we can do on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Related to sending the traffic to the original dest in Envoy, can you elaborate on why we haven't done this in the beginning? Because there were some like security implications, or there were some implications, and I'm wondering if we mitigated those.
So the one reason was because we weren't strongly able to distinguish between inbound and outbound traffic in Envoy, because we hadn't done the listener chain split, sending to original destination would have been a security risk, right? Because traffic would come in, there was no route for it, it would fall into original destination and go back out, right? So now you have impersonation. That's not good.
Okay.
Right, so we had to do the filter chain fix, right, to get the right security properties, and now you can use original destination liberally for egress traffic, and it's fine.
So this, has it been committed?
No.
No. So it's like it has a part on Envoy and obviously a part in Pilot, right?
Right, so we need work in Envoy to do protocol sniffing. The work to take advantage of protocol sniffing in Pilot is probably completely trivial.
Right, but the inbound listener split also needs work in Envoy and Pilot.
That has already happened.
So that one is done.
That's done. That's in 1.2 already.
Okay, so that's definitely needs to be on the release note for 1.2.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Josh, all of that is committed now, right?
Yes, but it's turned off by default.
It's turned off by default. Okay, so we should take a look at whether we can turn it on by default.
Yeah, how do we turn it on? Because we probably should go through some testing to be sure too.
Yeah, that's what we have to do, right? We have to go through some environments.
So what is the run of all the sniffing?
What's that, Lander?
So as we add more and more protocols to be sniffed, right? What is the runtime cost of that sniffing? And then would we still allow people to opt out of it and say that, hey, I don't want to pay that cost. I know the protocol, just use it.
Right. So we already have the I know the protocol that use it feature, right? That's do what you do today.
Right. Yeah, that's today.
Which is go and put the protocol on the port.
Okay, so that would stop the sniffing.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the redirecting the traffic to Envoy level, right now we pay attention to the pod spec container port. Would we just redirect everything, all the to just all ports to Envoy to be able to detect so that just to leverage the traffic detection, and then have an option to, if you add container ports, then we'll just have that finite list.
In talking to the Kubernetes folks, even for pods that there are plenty of pods out there that don't declare container port, that's still open ports. So I'm not sure it's actually valuable to scope down to container port at all.
Okay, so with the redirect, so the IP tables set up, just transition to when Envoy supports these features, we could just redirect all traffic to Envoy except for like the status port and any explicit excludes that are added to the annotations, and we'll be good. Okay.
So, Louis, regarding splitting up the listeners between outbound and inbound, assuming the testing shows good results, is there a reason that should be the only option? Like, why do we want to go back to a unified listener?
We don't.
Okay, good.
Right. So the only reason why it's flag control right now is because caution. But if we can satisfy ourselves by 1.2 ship time, we should probably make it the default.
Perfect. And
we should still have the flag.
We should probably have the flag so people could flip back to the old behavior just because we're paranoid. But we make it off by default. Right. It would make the listeners
actually in the mesh config, then people can just turn it off and turn it on whenever they want. I mean, today in mesh config, we have the outbound listener port. I mean, the proxy listener port as one setting, which is customizable. The inbound, the ingress listener port should also be in the mesh config so that people can actually specify one or both or whichever way they want to. But it becomes a single point of control. And from wherever you control mesh config is where you control these settings, rather than having a flag for each and every sidecar or a random flag inside pilot. This becomes an easier way to control it.
We also want to have the default behavior be the split.
That's what I was alluding to.
Same as specifying the listener port in the mesh config, that like what we do today anyway. So it's the mesh config contains the standard listener port 15,000. And we would just add one more port called inbound listener port as 15,003. And those will just be static settings.
Well, actually, there's a feature in Envoy today to detect if the traffic is originating from the same host or not. We could just validate that and not split the port at all.
That didn't work. I think Yushan tried it, and that didn't work that well, or there were issues on that.
Yeah, so we're trying to work through the issues. If we can do that, then we don't need 2 ports, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the listeners are split into inbound and outbound, do we know it solves the issue around Kafka and Cassandra? Mostly Kafka, when the pod tries to reach back to itself, or we have.
So those are the types of scenarios we have to test. It should, right? I mean, but
that's what I'm thinking.
Right. So, if there was one thing I would ask people to test with, it would be to test that feature with some of the kind of more esoteric, pods or things that have atypical communication patterns, right? Server send first, or Kafka, or what we've seen with Cassandra, for instance.
So I had a question. You mentioned on there that if we don't detect the protocol, we fall back to TCP. Isn't there some security concerns that if we don't detect HTTP properly, then we're kind of bypassing all the HTTP config?
Yes. Which is why when we tell people to write RBAC policies, right, we tell them to mostly write the policies based on identity principles on MTLS, which we'll touch on a little bit in the next thing. Ultimately, people can misrepresent their protocols, right, in their service config, right, to bypass that as well. In some sense, this is likely to be more robust than trusting users to actually declare protocols universally to get that security behavior.
Sure, but in the first case, it's the server, the actual operator needs to declare the port. In the second case, the client, who could be anyone, it could be someone, just calling you from externally, can do some sort of attack where they don't send a header in the first second or something. we fall back to TCP, and now they've kind of avoided all the HTTP rules.
So there's
Yeah.
Yes, but there is a problem with being able to allow. Well, no matter what happens, the server side is going to receive the traffic in the protocol that it supports, right? That's what sidecar declares, right? So if you want to guarantee that the traffic coming into your workload is HTTP on a specific port, go define the listener port in the sidecar and make it HTTP. Now, there's a further refinement that we can do, right, which is, making what we don't have today, and it's tricky with Kubernetes, is when I'm creating a sidecar for a workload, right? If you declared container ports for a workload, and those container ports declared protocols, then we could create a sidecar automatically for that enforced that those were the inbound protocols. All right, so there's probably a proposal that we should write up to do that. But right now we're telling people to just do that manually with sidecar.
Yeah, the thing I would be concerned is that right now, if they don't declare it as HTTP, it's going to always be TCP, and they'll realize that right away. Whereas now the default is that it will try to be HTTP, but then when some attacker sends a request that makes it fail the protocol sniffing, now they're in TCP mode, and now they've just avoided everything. So now, like, the default is unsafe.
If you're talking about security violation due to communication, won't you be doing RBAC like Louis said? And if you're talking about client-side traffic behavior, you should not be relying on your client-side being following all your restrictions anyways, right? So I'm still not getting what violation is going to happen.
But like that depends. While your RBAC is defined as HTTP layer, then the delayed sending a fallback to TCP will bypass that at all.
Right, but then you have a pretty weak security policy, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Exactly.
I think his question is we are defaulting to that weak. Like this is kind of downgrade attack.
Well, it's no worse than the current state today, right?
Yeah, because we assume TCP if you don't do anything. Is that correct, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm still not getting the downgrade attack here. Sorry.
Is this just, I mean, out of our domain? This is a network policy thing that's easy to do, right? So
yeah, the RBAC policies allow you to put constraints, right? So if you want to say, I'm not going to accept TCP traffic, right, you should have an RBAC policy that says, puts a restriction on the protocol.
Yeah, and if you are trying to control your client-side HTTP parameters, then your client might not have a sidecar or not be in the mesh anyways.
So I think
anything that the security posture has to be enforced on the server side.
Exactly.
Right. So I think the problem is if you're gonna fall back to TCP and have the RBAC declaring all the TCP traffic, what the point to fall back to TCP?
Right, then you're choosing to do that because you want to.
Okay, so as long as it's configurable, I think I'm fine.
It already is, right?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head if the RBAC spec has a restriction on protocol. I think it does, but we should look at it.
I think it does.
I'm not pretty sure. I
but
don't think it does.
But John, I mean, the other way to do it, if you want to guarantee that the port, a specific port receives only a specific protocol, you use the sidecar declaration to do it today.
Yeah, I get that you can do that. The thing I'm concerned about is that right now you have to do it, which is, that's bad UX. And so most people, once we move to this model, they no longer have to do it. They probably won't do it. Most people will stick to the defaults. And now everyone's going to default to using auto, which leaves them at risk to this downgrade attack. So a specific example of how you could use, say you had a virtual service where you say 99% of traffic goes to this subset based on some HTTP thing like a header or something. Now, when you get downgraded to TCP, those rules don't get applied.
Right, so that's not a security violation, right? That's a network management problem.
So considering that HTTP always basically technically works on top of TCP, TCP's set of policies and constraints should always be stricter than the protocols running on top of it. And if we have a way to enforce it, then this may be useful.
Right. So if we protocol sniff on the client side sidecar, right, then your ability to force HTTP traffic to not be TCP is pretty limited, right?
Yeah, and maybe even like TCP restrictions should always apply to all the protocols running on top of it. So technically, it cannot be. I mean, we should never allow more permissions over pure TCP than HTTP.
Right, but we express all that in the RBAC API. That's not the network or routing API. Right? We intentionally keep those two domains separate.
Another question I had is the sidecar doesn't configure gateways. So how does this work for ingress gateway?
Well, given that ingress gateway, you declare ports.
Yeah, you don't do sniffing on the gateways. It's only for the sidecars.
Okay.
I mean, you could declare the protocol on the ingress gateway as being auto if you want.
Oh, right. So you declare it in the gateway config. Okay.
But yeah.
Can I ask a question on container port?
Mm-hmm.
So, so today, if I have health check on my container port on a dedicated port, and if my other traffic goes to maybe a different port, what I can do today is I can specify container port, my main traffic, and the health check port would not be intercepted by Istio. How would I do that in the new way? Are we still going to honor for people who doesn't want sniffing on the port number so that they can still declare container port to only capture the specific container port they wanted? How do they opt out? I guess I'm trying to.
Well, what are the configuration options that we offered today then?
You only declare the ports you want to be captured, right? If there are ports you don't want to be captured, you don't declare.
So you're saying we want to have an option to say that a sidecar for this workload should
doesn't care. Right, like if I have 3 ports, I only want to capture traffic on 1 port.
Right, and the reason to allow non-declared ports to go through uncaptured is
because it's my Kubernetes health check on my services. I don't want Envoy capture that because it adds a lot of overheads.
So I think from a
because I'm not leveraging a capability from Istio from mutual TLS on my health check or traffic shifting. Then why would I?
Right. So which is easier for users, right? To capture everything and allow it to go through, right? Which is, if we capture a port and we enable permissive mode on it for MTLS, it will go through, right? So Kubernetes health checks would pass through, but now you'd see that in telemetry. Or to tell people if you want ports to not be captured, right? Right. So it's either we capture everything and then you do exclusion, or we capture nothing and you opt in, right? Which is a more usable pattern.
Right, and then there's also backwards compatibility.
Right. So we have to make sure that if we are going to capture everything by default, then we don't break it by default.
Right. Exactly. That was my thing. So let's talk about if we enable the same by default in 1.2, how can we ensure we're not breaking people who is doing container port today and maybe only capture the one of the 3 ports they care about?
Well, there's either we capture everything, right, and they all keep working, right?
Not really, because it could break people if they have mutual TLS enabled, right? Permissive is fine.
They'd have to be in strict, right?
Yeah, if it's strict, it could break people.
We do want to provide a config to say capture everything by default, but still ignore one. for example.
Right, that's what the scenario I was trying to.
That's what you want to need. You need to have to be backward compatible.
Right, but that's the right. So that's one of those two idioms, right? Either capture everything and then opt out, or capture nothing and opt in. Which of those two do we want to fall into?
I think we want to find the first one. At least that's what I think is the right thing to do.
I would suspect so as well.
Okay, if so, you will have to be clear on the because it's a different default than today. Because today we tell people declare this port, and that's the only port to opt in.
Right. So we have to. Right. I think it's okay if we're everything is in by default. Right, as long as we don't break traffic.
Yeah, I almost prefer the other way, because the other way could also enable me to disable sniffing on the port number, same as the way we're providing.
Sniffing, Lynn. This is actually distinct from sniffing. The container port stuff is about the listener chain split.
But how do you detect which port number? Don't you still have to sniffing a little bit?
No, sniffing is for protocols. It's not for ports.
Then how do you detect the port number?
No, we capture all ports.
Yeah. It's
So you capture all the port by default and then allow user to specify which one they don't.
Yes.
I think that's okay as long as we provide a migration path for user declare container port today.
Well, so what does declaring container port mean? What do you want it to mean?
Well, today means I only care about this particular port number or a list of port numbers.
Right, but we have a lot of use cases out there for pods not declaring container port.
And they accidentally skip all the policies that they do want to implement.
Right, and particularly pods that dynamically allocate ports, like Kafka, right, which have their own orthogonal service discovery mechanism.
Right. Okay. Then they shouldn't be using container port, because container port is not working.
Right, they can't use it, right?
Yeah.
So it has no meaning in that context, but we still want to capture that traffic for policy reasons.
So, Lynn, to meet your requirement, it looks like we at least need to identify the cases we know will break. One of them being if you have MTLS turned on by default and all the ports get captured, and you don't want some ports to have MTLS, or you don't want some ports to go through the sidecar. So for those types of installation, we need to say, this is the config you need to add, extra configuration, where these are the ports you have opted out.
Right.
So we need the exclude, right?
Yes, exactly. Oops.
Yeah, if we believe exclude is the better experience. Sounds like it is less work to exclude a specific one.
Yeah, there is actually a config for exclude stop port, but
there's a lot of static on the line.
It's a lot of background noise. I think Yuchen, it might be you. Okay, now it's good.
Either that or you're on an airplane. So what, I guess we need to get a sense of how many people have strict enabled for inbound traffic. Right, so the primary use case we know of today is the kubelet health check, right? Being unable to do mutual TLS. And so if you enable strict mode on that port, it will get rejected. That's the overriding one that we see today.
Metrics is also a potential one. I mean, we do provide in our Prometheus config like some certs and all that, but if people are using some external scraping and then their application is exposing a metrics port that is being scraped, that yes.
That's a
so
good
right
one.
now it doesn't have to be declared and it just works, and now they'll have to do something to make it work.
Right, but today, right, to put it into strict mode, they would have had to have gone and write an auth policy explicitly and gone and put it into strict mode to do that. Right.
Not if they didn't even mention the container port.
Not if they didn't. It's not a container port. It's captured.
Exactly.
It's just completely outside our visibility. And if we start changing everything, they need to make it visible to us.
That feels like a flaw than a feature, to be honest. Like we just never, we had you miss your container ports and things are accidentally working and you don't actually know.
So yes, I think that's a bit orthogonal though, right? The fact that it will break people still stands.
So we can have a flag, right, which is capture only container port, right, or capture all ports, right, as a global mechanism of transitioning people across that boundary. What we would probably recommend to people, ideally, what we would like to be able to do is, for the kubelet health check, right, we want to be able to special case something because it's just really common. And then everything else would go into capture all ports with permissive MTLS enabled by default, right? And then you would gradually migrate towards strict mode, which is some of what the next proposal in the agenda is about, right? But kubelet should work with permissive MTLS, right? Because it will fall back to plain text, right?
If we just
okay,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there a penalty we're paying for permissive mutual TLS when we know it's not going to be mutual TLS? Because the way I look at the permissive configuration on Envoy, it's like a double configuration. If I have 3,000 lines, because the fact I'm doing permissive, it's become 6,000 lines for my Envoy configuration.
That's not supposed to be the case.
Oh, it is definitely the case because the whole thing is just replicated.
It is in 1.1. When I look at my Envoy configuration, it's like 8,000 line, and I'm only running 3 services in my Istio mesh.
Absolutely, yeah, it's replicated.
Is it because we're configuring both?
Right, exactly. That's how permissive works. It's really costly.
All right.
Right, it doubles the filter chain.
I thought the switch to do that was that refactoring as part of separating listener and filter chain, right, resolved some of that issue.
Right, but that is nothing today.
All right, well, we should prioritize getting that in. That's not a user visible change, right? That's just an optimization of the refactoring to the listener and filter chain split.
Right, but not in 1.2.
No, that could go into 1.2.
No, this is like too risky. This is not.
We've already done the filter chain split. The MTLS, the TLS sniffing stuff is done in the...
No, it changes the protocol between Pilot and Envoy. Since like Pilot deliver double listener filter chains to Envoy.
Yeah, it's Pilot like creating those chains, right? Like those filter chains.
Right, it's Pilot creating 2 filter chains, one with TLS, one without.
Right, but that doesn't mean we serve duplicate RDS, doesn't mean we have to serve duplicate CDS, right?
No, CDS and RDS is not duplicated anyway.
Right.
Only filter chains are duplicated.
Why is it 6,000 lines then?
I think the listeners alone is just like a big long thing, because especially if you happen to have MTLS sniff, well, no, it's not.
No, MTLS sniff is only 1 extra line.
Yeah, it should be only on the inbound port. So unless you happen to have like 20, 30 inbound ports, you should only have this filter chain sniffing for the inbound port of that pod or sidecar or service. Yeah, it could not be like that long. I mean, yes, it is replicate, but I don't think it should be that long because it's only for very few ports.
Yeah, even if it's like longer, it's not a critical issue that we should like make that a priority.
No, we should just track that as a bug, but it doesn't seem like it should be that material. Anyway, let's get back to the semantics, because we can always do that with those kinds of optimizations. But I guess we should make a note in the agenda that there's a question about why things have so much config overhead in that situation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide an example. Yeah, my point was, if I know this thing doesn't need mutual TLS, I'd rather not to have permissive configuration.
Well, right now the sniffing is really cheap.
Yeah, if we are actually capturing everything and being permissive, I'm almost sure the config is actually less, the lines, compared to if you have container ports and you have TLS configured for some and not for the other, right?
Right, it would be much smaller.
It will be much smaller.
Okay.
Right, and the third facet, Lynn, is with the default outbound route being basically original destination, you'll probably end up in a situation where you have far fewer clusters. Right, on the ingress side,
absolutely.
The inbound side is just listen, sniff, whatever filters, which are pretty static, no routes, and the outbound cluster is original destination.
Okay, that's good to hear. So yeah, we probably should run this through 1.2 as soon as possible, once we know how to enable this.
Yeah, so Yuchen, okay, yeah, he added some stuff on here, but yeah, we should probably get some documentation out into, maybe write up an email on to discuss and ask people to test out in that mode. But not everything that's in this document, right, is in 1.2, right? The protocol sniffing is not in 1.2. I think there's still some work to do on the IP table side of things, Yuchen, right? We're still doing some more testing. Yuchen was doing some more testing with this feature, but the basics of it are there in 1.2, and we would try and fix any bugs.
Okay.
So what about case where the client does not send the first byte? The client just connects and waits for the server to send something, like sniffing.
So then
cannot work there.
I think it's not the client. There are several protocols like MySQL, Mongo, and so on, for which I was telling Lizanne we need a timer on the server side that actually receives. I mean, if it doesn't receive any data, then it actually times out and falls back to the MTLS version or the non-MTLS version. It has to pick one or the other.
Right, but I think that's also a use case where sniffing is probably materially bad, right? Because
it is currently, right?
They're going to kick in this fallback.
Mongo and Kafka, several protocols are breaking with the sniffing because of the client first.
Right, because the server first.
Yeah, these are all server first things, but sniffing for HTTP is not that hard because you always need a timer anyway. If there's nothing that comes out on the wire, then you fall back and then just treat it as a plain TCP connection.
Right.
So I think Mandar asked the question around the overhead or any penalty are we paying for sniffing? It looks like this falls in that category that you're just holding the connection open. I mean, the same time more or less.
Yes, there is a connection establishment latency overhead.
Yeah.
Right, but there's not a huge CPU overhead.
Yeah, not that huge.
Depending on how many packets you need to buffer. I'm guessing most of the protocol sniffing is very minimal.
If you're sniffing MTLS, you'll sniff in the first NTU. If you're sniffing HTTP or TCP, if it's H2, you sniff it in the first 16 bytes.
HTTP1 is different.
It's a little different, but there's a lot of code that's been written that has been pretty well tested to do this over a very long period of time.
Right.
Pretty buggy code, though, I would say.
No,
yes.
You won't. The truth is, you won't get everything, right? So you're going to make a decision about how quickly you want to sniff versus how perfect you want to sniff.
Yes.
But you're going to capture a lot, right? Which is the point.
That's fair. Yep.
Now, the server send first protocols like MySQL, right, where client connects, right? If it's MTLS, the client is sending packets first, so we already know what we're doing, right? So there's no problem sniffing MTLS on that situation. It's when the protocol is plain text and then the underlying layer 7 protocol, whatever it is, then you'll have to time out. And then in the case of MySQL, the timeout will fall back into TCP, which is what we're doing anyway for MySQL and those other protocols.
We should, not we're doing. We're not doing yet.
Not doing what yet? Sorry.
That timeout and falling back today.
No, we are not falling back to TCP.
They just hangs and then the MySQL, Mongo, and a few others actually break. So people disable.
Yeah, we have to fix that. That's about. We have to time out.
Well, the current timeout behavior is timeout to drop the connection, not let them through as TCP.
No, that should time out to TCP. Are you talking about the MTLS sniffing we have right now?
Right.
Yeah, no, that should time out to TCP.
The listener filter timeout result the connection drop.
All right, well, we need to fix that. Because that just breaks traffic, right?
Right. So that means those protocol users have to make the mutual TS strict or disabled.
No, if they're in permissive mode, right?
Right now, I mean, in permissive mode, they cannot get through.
Okay, so we need to fix
today.
That, right?
Yeah.
We need to fix the implementation of permissive mode in Envoy. Is that something that you can do for 1.2?
That's well. What's that 1.2 timeline? It's already.
So we have a branch cut, but this is a bug, not a feature.
Is there a bug?
Yeah, we want to get out this month though on the rough timeline.
Yeah, I know.
For Lizan.
This is pretty bad, right? This is an existing user-reported bug, right?
Yeah, I do receive those questions in the Envoy side as well.
Right. So yeah, we either right now tell people go do strict or go do plain text as a workaround, but it's still a workaround.
All right.
So it's probably not a P0 issue to fix, but it's probably a P1. Okay.
So for this container port, I guess we need to decide as a team, once we get some tests running on it, whether we should enable this by default for 1.2, how confident we are.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the determination we have to make.
Yeah. And I assume the configuration would not require any restart of our control plane components to toggle it on and off. Is it mesh config or?
So mesh config is dynamic now, as in if mesh config is changed, pilot seems to be reading it.
Yeah.
So that part is okay, but does it affect anything else that needs? Yeah, I mean, like anything in the init container or something like that.
Like IP tables.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and also the existing stuff running in the data plane.
So any existing pods would not be affected.
Well, after restart, how would it impact it too, right? Because if you're on 1.1, you need to upgrade to 1.2's Envoy, you're going to need to restart your pods.
Yeah,
and then would change their behavior.
Right. They would have all the container ports.
That's the thing I was asking. Right, that's the thing I was asking Louis earlier. How backwards compatible are we honor the declaration of container port for 1.1 user?
This breaks it if we go to the pattern where you have to explicitly exclude.
Right, exactly. I agree. So I
mean, but we have been breaking things from 1.0 to 1.1 also. I don't know where it lies. This is API change.
I think that unless someone can actually like really focus on this testing, trying to get this to 1.2 as default is very risky. Just by the amount of discussion we have had right now.
Yes.
I think there are many cases which would be easy to miss.
Upgrade and install, right?
Yeah. That's the biggest risk, really, is the upgrade.
Right, upgrade is always the biggest risk.
Yeah, and the thing is, for 1.2, we kind of position there's no major changes, so we probably won't break people as much as 1.1.
1.2 already has a new Envoy build in it, right?
Yeah, but not much change in people's behavior as far as their YAML file for their microservices.
Right, so I believe the Envoy in 1.1 works with the filter chain split. The only thing it doesn't have would be protocol sniffing.
Oh, but nobody knows how to use that. I mean, if it works, nobody knows. People would still declare their container port.
No. So what we're saying is if you're already using a 1.1 Envoy, right, the container port restriction would be lifted. We would have the flag. We could detect an upgrade if you wanted to use container port as opt-in or opt-out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, we have to be able to tell if it's an upgrade.
So are you saying they don't have to upgrade to using the old Envoy from 1.1?
They can keep using the old Envoy, yes.
Yes, but what if they want to pick up a security vulnerability when Envoy has one? They have to upgrade to 1.2 Envoy.
Right, but I think we're saying is that the container port feature is not dependent on an Envoy build later than the one that's already in 1.1.
Okay, yeah.
So you don't have to restart your pods, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Now, Pilot has to know if the protocol sniffing feature is available in the build of Envoy, right? We already report the Envoy build, right?
Right,
We need the upgrade.
but protocol sniffing is not in 1.2.
Right. So I think that's somewhat moot.
Well, yeah, but the problem only happens when I need to update my Envoy to the latest one in 1.2. Then I would have to restart my container and my pod.
Right. So we're saying you don't have to do that.
Yeah, but what if people want to update to the latest data plane? I mean,
that's fine. There's nothing preventing them from doing that.
Right. Wouldn't we break people though with the container port? Because now it's.
We would tell them in the upgrade instructions to choose which setting of that flag you want. Container port as opt-in or container port as opt-out.
Okay, and if you, yeah.
And probably what it means is the default no flag is opt-in by default, and you set the flag opt-out by default. We can do it the other way and say, we'll keep the existing behavior. I have opt-out by default and tell them in the next release we'll make it opt-in by default. But at some point, someone's going to go through
that. So Louis, for these things, do we have a broader policy around it? Like, do you give people one release, one minor release to migrate, and then you remove the flag or something like that? Or
right now, the only thing we have a policy on is API feature.
Yeah.
We try to be backward compatible and install.
Okay.
But we can document variation. Right. I don't know how many people out there have enabled things in strict mode, which is the only thing that would break.
People would like to, I know.
Yeah, I think everybody wants to. Strict is really what people really want to use Istio.
They can't put the health checking port into strict mode.
That is fine, but they at least can make sure every other service communication is strict. That's really important to many of our users. Because permissive, you can't really trust. I mean, it's plain, right?
When then the only thing that we have an issue right now is the health checker. Really. Right. That's the reason why we have some ports as plain text.
Isn't there a feature where the health check goes through the is handled by the pilot agent or the proxy?
Yeah, I remember this.
Sidecar injector rewrites the health check.
It is one of the workarounds.
Yeah, there's an alpha feature for that. I think it's documented somewhere. I haven't tried it.
So I was in the IPv6 testing. I had to enable that to make the Nginx test work. So I mean, I have used it. It seems to work.
Okay.
You know, the other thing that we can look to do, I don't know if that's feasible in 1.2, is to detect if we'd have to know, well, if the kubelet was local, there might be some way to detect the traffic actually being local. To effectively treat the kubelet as egress. Anyway, we're out of time, but we should let's make sure we accumulate these comments in the doc, and then go back and see if we can do the testing.
Yep.
And we didn't get the third one, which was going to be how we would more rapidly turn on MTLS. Right.
Yeah, we'd love to have that topic.
Yeah. So Lynn, I put a link to the bug that you created. I also
I appreciate it.
Pointer to an Envoy issue that we created about optimistically trying TLS on the client side.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to read that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that I was talking to the security team. They are also very interested in implement this feature too. They said actually the network team had some pushback last year, but I think now it's a good timing to look at that too.
Right. I think that all ties into the how quickly am I able to transition from permissive to strict.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, we went over time already, so I don't think we have time to cover the next two items. It will have to be in 2 weeks. Is it anything that's urgent?
Well, let's try and make progress on those docs. They are obviously very important features. So we need to come to some reconciliation about them, but
right.
We can probably make good progress on the doc.
Yeah, and there is like related to the your third item. No, that's the last one.
That one.
Okay, so these ones. So I guess is there a doc about this?
No,
or
right now
this is
there's
just yeah. So people maybe should look at these two issues and comment directly on the issue, and we can cover them next time. Also, I want to bring awareness to the last item in the agenda, which is related to service entry. And in fact, John Howard will write a document with describing the context and the proposal, how we can fix this. So John, maybe next week you can present that document, but people, people should read a bit, around this issue. And John, if you have the document earlier, feel free to share it earlier, right? There is no need to wait for the meeting.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, well, I think it's time to to stop now. And thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Louis, for handling the meeting. So, and see you in 2 weeks. We'll definitely have the meeting in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, bye.